Ed, thank you so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate you coming on today.
Yeah, thanks, brother. I'm happy to have a conversation with you today.
Yeah, looking forward to learning about you. But I want to start off sort of back to the start. So, how did you first sort of get involved with fitness? Were you a active child in childhood?
So I actually grew up pretty fat, and I was actually pre-diabetic by time I was 12. So I had gym class first period, and I woke up to breakfast in bed from my mom every morning. Sweet, sweet motherly, thing she'd do for me. But she'd be giving me like a stack of Aunt Jemima pancakes, tons of pancake syrup, and then like a 24-ounce glass of orange juice. So I'd be walking into middle
Mm.
school with like 400 grams of sugar carbohydrates just pounding into my bloodstream. And so I started getting these weird like dizzy spells, and I'd kind of like have my sight go for a little bit, and I'd be very disoriented where like clearly I was just having this monster blood sugar spike that I just could not deal with in my body. But I didn't really say anything. I just thought I was maybe going through puberty and, stuff was just changing. And obviously, my parents weren't educated with fitness and nutrition. They'd go on the roller coaster from here and there, but the weight would always come back. The discipline would go away. So it wasn't really a factor in my life. And I was playing ice hockey all throughout my childhood, but not to the degree that it made me fit and healthy, but probably just enough to like where I wasn't a full blown diabetic.
Hmm.
So I get into high school and I'm actually going more through puberty. So I start losing weight. I go through a growth spurt. So those dizzy spells and stuff kind of go away, but I hadn't really changed anything about my lifestyle. So end of eighth grade, I get my first girlfriend. We break up in the summer, and I'm just a mess in my room, sobbing like a little boy. And my mom at that point was on the roller coaster, running 3 miles a day, knew how much it was helping her. And she couldn't take my, crying anymore. So she's like, I think it was like 8 o'clock one night. She's like, Edward, just get out of this house and go run. Like, I know what it does for me. Just go try it. Just go do it. So I ran around my block 3 times. And on that third lap, I just had this first real internal understanding that I was conscious, which I just hadn't had my whole life. Growing up, for the most part, we're running subconsciously well into our teen years. And for some people, well into their 30s if they never really, take accountability for their life. And not that it's bad or good, it's just how our brains work. And the
Mm.
culture that we're in doesn't really reinforce those things a lot, or at least in general. It's definitely changing now, but nonetheless, I remember walking and I just like looked at my hands and I'm like, whoa, I have control over this thing, you know? And it obviously
Mm.
had such a profound mental impact where I wasn't sad anymore. I'm like, I feel good, like out of nowhere. 2 weeks just crying, and now I feel like nothing happened and I have control of my life. So overnight, got obsessed with running. Within a couple weeks, got rid of soda, ditched fast food, started cooking for myself, which at the time was like baking chicken with no seasonings and like a baked potato with ketchup. Peanut butter and jellies, and eating more, whole grains, and kind of taking the first rudimentary steps toward health, which in my family, I was really the pioneer of. So by the time I'm turning 14, I know I'm going to be getting into varsity hockey. I know obviously how good it started to feel to lose weight and get more confident and be more attractive to girls, and all that stuff that comes with being a young boy and all the things that we value in those years. I looked at myself. I'm like, man, I got really skinny. Like I'm going to be dealing with 180-pound dudes on the ice. That I'm a defenseman, so I'm going to be taking bodies. Like I need to bulk up. So I went into the local Gold's gym that was, a mile from my house, or wherever or whatever it was. And I walked through the doors and they had all the photos of Arnold and Ronnie Coleman and Jay Cutler and all the guys that were competing at the Olympias in that time frame, which was like oh 06, oh 05, something like that. So it was like peak Jay
Yep.
Cutler, Ronnie Coleman legacy in bodybuilding. Obviously, at that time, the internet and resources were pretty, mediocre in terms of what I could find as someone who's interested in fitness. So I looked at those pictures and I looked at my body and I'm like, I need that. And I need exactly that. So I got really obsessed with bodybuilding all throughout high school. I was like the gym kid.
Right.
And training in that fashion, plus hockey, plus just my general, not really competent athletic background growing up, and potentially just having a very disorganized asymmetrical structure from my genetics, potentially. Like I just developed this level of asymmetry and compensations that just felt so weird in my body that I would blame on hockey or I'd blame on injuries. And I became very obsessive, almost to, not almost, but to a very detrimental self, kind of the way I saw myself degree, where I'd be comparing myself to dudes who've been on steroids for 30 years with perfect genetics as this young kid that's like aspiring to be that. But no matter what I could do, I'd never be that guy. Right. But I was just
Mm.
delusional thinking I could do it.
Yeah.
So once I got out of high school, I doubled down on bodybuilding and I was preparing for my first show. Now, the caveat to this is throughout high school, I was messing around with like testosterone boosters. And at that time, there were things called pro hormones available over the counter, which are
Mm.
basically a step or two away from what would be an androgenic or testosterone based compound that once you consume it, after your liver processes it, it becomes that thing in your body. But they're super toxic. There was no regulation on them. I had to go to like the off brand supplement store with the local bodybuilder at the counter, like get it hooked up, not have him ID me because I wasn't 18. And so I took some of that stuff and, so I bulked up. I was probably like 185 pounds, in my high school days, thick little meatball kid. So I diet down for my first show and like 3 weeks out from it, I had probably lost 30 pounds. I was down to like 140 maybe at most. And I'm like, why don't I go max out on deadlifts today? Right? Like what better time than being completely malnourished and skinny and try and deadlift as much as I possibly can, right? At 18. So I deadlift, I build up into sets. I hit 395 like really easily. So I'm like, oh, cool. I got like well over 400 in the tank and I could, maybe PR this at such a lean and, emaciated body weight. So I hit that 395 and I was so excited that I hit it that I went to go drop the bar from the top and I was using my lifting straps. One strap got stuck on the bar and it bent my knee in the path of the bar as it fell. So I crushed my
Oh.
left leg with a 395-pound barbell from the top of a deadlift and, got taken to the hospital, was ambulanced. And the next 12 weeks after that, so that was probably like May through August. Um, I wasn't getting any real answers from PTs. For whatever reason, they just kept telling me that it was a deep muscle contusion and that it didn't qualify for an MRI, like three doctors. So I finally go to this orthopedist that my aunt told me about, and he finally orders me an MRI. I get it done, and they're like, "Yeah, so you tore your quadriceps tendon, 12 weeks ago, but it's the fibers have already started to reorient in a way that like surgery is kind of pointless. Like we'd have to cut it open and then redo it. So it's like good luck, and they just pushed me along to PT and just kind of sent me on my way. So that became the first, string of a bunch of stupid decisions into my early 20s. So I'm like, okay, PT is not working. I'm not getting good guidance. No one's really giving me a good answer. It took them 12 weeks to actually get me an answer of what actually happened. And now I'm turning 19 and I'm like, you know what? For my birthday, I'm going to go buy some steroids and some growth hormone from the biggest meathead at my gym. And that would be my birthday present to myself. Yeah, I was working at GNC at the time. I'm the dude behind the counter trying to sell people supplements and get people jacked. And so I do a 12-week cycle of steroids, which turned out to be either like bathtub grade or cut, because I was only supposed to get 12 shots or 24 shots, I think it was. I was doing like twice a week. And I wound up getting like 34 or something out of it. So, and I was measuring it properly. So either this guy gave me some bunk stuff that was just good enough to get me like actually feeling it, or I got some like really dirty test. So I
Right.
didn't trust the growth that he gave me. I tried doing the PCT. The PCT was just like white sugar in a vial that he called. It was Clomid or one of those kind of things that are supposed to bring up your natural test production back into action. So I didn't do that because I realized everything was bad. And here I am at 19 and a half in 1 year. I went from 185 to like 135, 140, and then up to 198 pounds by the end of that steroid cycle. So
Wow.
just like this huge up and down metabolically alone, testosterone or not, that is an absurd amount of stress to put on someone's body in like less than a year. Probably so injury happened in May. I probably started dieting in like February. So from like February to December, like a total of
Mm.
90 pounds gained and lost or more. And so that cycle brought me back from, 150 or whatever, all the way up to 198. And at 5'7", like that's an uncomfortable weight to be at. I felt like just I'd get gassed just going upstairs, but I was jacked. And the thing about testosterone is it makes you feel invincible. So like as messed up as my body was, as much as I literally could barely feel my left leg working from potentially the neurological blunt impact damage, from the tendon being, rehabbed and recovered in a weird way, I just didn't really feel anything. And then I have a photo of my back after that. And I had like pretty intense levels of what would look like scoliosis. Like my right back, the right side of my back was like a mound, like 2.5 inches off of my lumbar. And then the left side is just like non existent. So the amount of
Wow.
compensations I was dealing with from the hips down was insane. And then I also had dislocated my shoulder a bunch of times in hockey. So every injury in my body is left sided my whole life.
Mm.
So, stupid decision number two, right? Now, at that time, what wound up happening was, for lack of a better word, like an ego death, where I got off that cycle and hormones change quickly. And hormones are a massive player in your sense of self. And so, in what would be the typical man's like peak years of vigor and testosterone and everything like that, setting up the foundation for the rest of your life, I am just in the pits, tanked. So, very weird, 18 to 24-month recovery. In that time, I had to let go of that bodybuilding identity that I associated myself with. And so I was just lost and seeking a new identity. I found the underground nightclub culture in New York City and Brooklyn because I grew up on Long Island. I hadn't mentioned that.
Right.
So, get into partying. I go to be a DJ. I start DJing. I start producing music. I go to music production school in the city. And I was always working out, but it wasn't something that was a big piece of my life at that point anymore, just because of all the injuries. So I'd go to the
Mm.
gym and I'd lift, but it just wasn't really anything. But I never stopped training.
Yeah. Just going back to when you were on those sort of steroids, sorry. So did you that short period you were doing them, did you feel any negative effects at that time, or was it more what happened after that was the negatives?
I mean, I've said this on other podcasts, and we can get into it a little bit. We don't have to go into the fullness of it, but out of all the drugs I took in my, early 20s, testosterone was by far the most impactful. Um, a lot of people don't understand the scope of how much it changes who you think you are.
Hmm.
For men, it is the hormone that makes us who we are in a lot of ways. And so when you get into super physiological levels of that, which for me as a 19-year-old, I probably had 700 tests, right? So I was probably well up into the thousands on that cycle. And now I'm like this superhuman version of Edward physically, but like such a mess internally. It's very hard to navigate that stuff. And it's impossible. I would argue it's impossible to honestly navigate it at that age. Testosterone replacement therapy has become such a cop out for young dudes. Granted, we're in a generation that has plummeting testosterone levels, which I can get into this later, but I brought mine up into the 85th percentile of a 30 to 40-year-old range going through all this stuff naturally.
Right.
And so there's plenty of ways to maximize what the environment and food supply and water, all this stuff that's against us. There's natural ways to go about it. But it's become so painfully prolific amongst young men, more kids hopping on gear than ever at younger age, fifth, like not even out of high school, bro. I mean, there were
Yeah, it's
like two
crazy.
kids in high school that you could tell were gassed up. You know, they were football players. Their dad was a juice head. Their dad was giving them Anavar smoothies or whatever, you know, which is weird in its own right. But nonetheless, man, during it, it will make you completely not know who you were before it. And after done improperly, which, you know, how proper can a 19-year-old do anything, really,
Mm.
especially something with that brevity and intensity? You know, it
Yeah,
can really
absolutely.
mess people up. And more so, it's going to forever create a level of dysmorphia in someone's body and their perception of self and how they value what they think they can do with their strength in such a way that it becomes addictive. The substance itself isn't, but the psychological side of things, and you take it from that young of an age, like you probably ain't getting
Yeah,
off of that for the rest of your life. And now you're reliant on the pharmaceutical industry for your entire sense of masculinity for the rest
yeah.
of your life.
And I suppose the difference as well from when you did it to now as well, you've got the addition of social media and all of
Oh,
the
yeah.
people taking it on there who aren't openly telling people that they're taking it. And obviously that's a whole nother,
Well, I would argue, yeah, I would argue that now it's actually spoken about so much that it's become more accepted or rationalized by younger people. And it's almost like a badge of honor now on social media to say you take steroids when clearly you do. And that
yeah,
gives, you know, a 19-year-old kid like me at the time so much of a green light, more than I ever had. I had to go to the most degenerate dude at the gym who's willing to sell it to me. And now you got these 18-year-olds who can go to that dude's doctor and they'll
yeah.
give it to them with no problems. And you're actually getting good stuff. And you know, they're probably not monitoring themselves as much as they should. But nonetheless, dude, I would argue actually the opposite, where like when I was coming up in it, all the fake natties were around. And now it's like for the younger generation, there's so many people, like average dudes, like not even competing, that are
Yeah.
talking about their cycles and getting kids on it and telling them where to get it from because it's so easy to get now. And it's really sad to me. It's really sad to me.
I suppose I never thought of it that way. I suppose when you went on it, you had to go out of your way to get it, like you say. So yeah, that sort of
Yeah,
change.
yeah. Now it's too easy to get.
Yeah. And in terms of your story there, so you said you sort of fell off that edge and you sort of went into the party scene, the um, sort of abusing your body in that way.
Mhm.
At what point was it you decided to change it round?
Yeah, yeah. So that's on the drug side of things. So at that time, I was in a very toxic relationship for many years, and the last thing that was keeping us together were the festivals and the raves and all that. And we went to a festival called Electric Forest in Michigan, where our neighbors actually had a test kit. And so they tested the stuff that we brought with us, and it was pure methamphetamine and like some synthetic, you know, mescaline tablet. And they
Right.
gave us real MDMA. And I took a tiny bit of it, having taken what I thought was MDMA for years. And now all of a sudden, I realize, what have I been taking? Because it wasn't that. And I got freaked out, dude. I got so scared. It was that was the eye-opening moment where it's like I got to get my life together here because what I've been doing, the only thing that's my saving grace are my mother's prayers and the fact that I'm like 23, you know, and I'm young and
You've
my body
been
could
through a lot.
handle that. Maybe actually younger
Yeah.
than that, 21, 22. Like it could handle that kind of abuse at that age. But if I kept going even a year or two, man, who knows? Who knows? So at
Mm.
that point, get out of that toxic relationship, thus getting away from the partying. And I found this store on Long Island that sold alkaline water, and they had like infrared saunas and other detox therapies and stuff. And I just started drinking the water. Actually, it was someone at a festival that I met. They're like, "Oh, dude, you got to check this store out. You know, I live right around the block from you and I go there all the time, whatever." So it was through that means that I kind of had, my next path, that next door open up for me. And I start working at this store and I start getting healthy. I stop, taking all the hard party drugs, got a little bit more into like the psychedelic side of things and whatnot, the safer, right, choices I could make where it's not a crystal rock that it could be anything. And thank
Yeah.
God, dude, fentanyl wasn't around at that point. I did get a batch of bath salts while that was in the mix in those years. That put me in the hospital, and I was sick
Wow.
for almost like 10 straight days with like 100 something fever. So definitely, dealt with the repercussions of those choices in a lot of ways. So start, cleaning my body up, start getting back into working out a bit. And then as we were talking off camera, had a crush on a girl that was working with me. And we have this conversation about protein. And coming from the bodybuilding meathead background, right? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'm bringing my chicken in or whatever. I'm eating it, my grilled chicken. And I'm like, oh yeah, you need protein, you need this, you need that. And so she sent that to her like nutritionist at the time, and then she read me back the email from her nutritionist, which she was vegan, and I'm like,
Right.
huh, like I never thought about that. And I like this girl, so let me just try going vegan for a little bit and see how it feels. And that store also sold like greens powders and talked about alkalizing your body and your blood and talking about Otto Warburg and all that kind of stuff. It was like my first introduction to like the kind of conspiratorial rabbit hole of food and environment, right?
Hmm.
So I go vegan, and of course, like having been through everything I've been through, I feel great. I feel super energized. My head feels clearer because my body's not so bogged down. So I'll double down on it, get a little bit more into the moral, ethical side of things, start watching the documentary films and all that. And she still having a crush on her. She was a yoga teacher, so start doing yoga, start doing that whole thing. And wind up going to do a yoga teacher training myself. I was certified, and what was is no longer available. I was certified in like the most intensive classical yoga training that was available in the States. So I did
Right.
that. It was like 30 days, phone off, no communication to the outside world, waking up at 4 a.m., staring at a candlelight, not looking at, getting Ayurvedic meals, doing all like hard. Like I was basically, as close to India as I could have been in the States, which was a super unique and really just like paradigm, breaking experience for me in a lot of ways, coming from the hustle and bustle of outside New York City. So I go to Hawaii, live there like a little nomad out of the back of a truck for almost a year. And then I come back home to New York, go back to Sedona where I did the training. And that was where I met my now wife. Fell in love with her. We got a crazy long story, which it's a movie, but the way it all transpired was just incredible. So she winds up getting pregnant. We're back out in Arizona, and I had just turned 25, turning 26, and I look at myself in the mirror. Oh, and that was also where the veganism stopped for us. So she was vegan 6, 7 years. I'd been vegan at that point for 2, 2.5 maybe. And
Hmm.
it was the pregnancy that her body was just screaming for animal nutrition, like salvation, like dreams of eggs, where it was like clearly this internal signaling
That craving. Yeah.
that was just really changing her mind about it. I personally was never too deep into veganism for the sake of moral or ethical arguments. I just thought it was a better nutritional choice because throughout time in my life, I'd always been trying to maximize something. So when I was bodybuilding, I was trying to push myself as hard as I can. When I was partying, I was trying to achieve psychological states that could not be possible in the real world. And so I've always kind of had that intensity and that like all in or nothing mentality in a lot of ways. So after I saw her starting to eat eggs, I realized like my mouth is watering now. And so I had, 4 eggs the first time, and I just felt this sensation of warmth inside of me that was like, oh my goodness, where had this been? And so over the, next couple months, she's still going in the pregnancy. Right before my son was born, or it might have even been that day, I took this photo of me in the mirror where I just looked at myself and I'm like, I can't do anything hard anymore. Like my body just I'm so loose from yoga. I'm so like I built so much tissue from bodybuilding that bodybuilding with steroids to a super physiological, I should not be walking around at 198 pounds. Like the amount my tissue stretched and muscle bellies and tendons and everything like that. Like I was just so hypermobile and I could not create tension in my body to do hard things anymore. So I
Mm.
started looking into like calisthenics. That was kind of my first thing because hand balancing and yoga, it's a pretty easy carryover. So I started looking at some of these hand balancer and kind of like acrobatic dudes. I lived with one of them who was in Hawaii with me, and he was pretty jacked. I'm like, okay, like this seems like a great skill. It's going to get me super jacked and really quote unquote functional to one degree or another with my upper body at least. It looks cool, like it seems fun. So I start getting after hand balancing. That got me more into body weight stuff. And then I realized like I just love the gym. So I went back to the gym and I'm looking around at everything and I'm like, I can't go back to bodybuilding. So what else is out there, you know? So that
Mm.
was when I learned about stuff like functional patterns and FRC, if you're familiar with them, functional range control. They're a
Right.
mobility based system where it's very isolative, but it's very corrective, right? And fixing. I was like, I need to fix myself and I need to get strong. If not for me, for my son, because where I was at was just, I was a mess internally, externally. I smoked pot throughout that whole time, 10 years smoking pot almost. And so that was when I found the rope through that endeavor.
Yeah. And just in there, you were speaking about how you sort of did it for your son, and at that time, and how you got to the point where your body wasn't able to do hard things. So, like physically, what is it about doing hard things that you think is beneficial? Like, why should our bodies be able to do that?
Yeah, well, as men, higher levels of testosterone are correlated with the internal level of satisfaction that we experience in doing hard things. So for me, it was a very like blunt and not objective through blood work, but objective through experience that my endocrine system and my general like baseline was way, way, way low. Like everything I did was gentle. Any like kind of hard physical activity just left me drained within like 10, 15 minutes, especially while I was plant based. And then, kind of building back that foundation for me internally with how my body responded to the animal foods, I think was a large part in that kind of realization that I had in the mirror, where I was building myself back up from the nutritional choices where it's like I need to do this again. Like I didn't have that at all. I felt like I was just this depleted, emaciated, kind of skinny fat version of me while I was vegan. And granted, maybe I could have done it on the plant-based diet, but the way that all the events had lined up and the way that I had treated my body prior, like the foundation I had with peaking my testosterone exogenously and then tanking it, like I just don't really think that would have actually worked for
Mm.
me. And so building myself back up, that was when I, got back in the gym, but knew I had to do it differently. And that was when I found rope flow and the primary movement system that I coach and teach and train from, even in my own explorations, which is WEC method. And from there, that gave me both the physical inputs and the neurological inputs from the rope, because the rope is such it is such a profound tool, and we could dive into that in maybe this next little segment here. But
Yeah, absolutely.
it gave me everything I needed to like reintegrate tension in my body through a gentle but scalable enough movement practice that's also very biomechanically advantageous. And the
Hmm.
way that it impacts our brain, like it was just this perfect recipe in the form of a simple piece of rope and a new approach to what you could do with a rope that just basically within a year like built a physical and a like proprioceptive foundation for me that gave me the doorway to start training heavier without dealing
Mm.
with the compensations while rebalancing my body. And then, one thing over the next over the last 5 years now, it's built me into, what someone might see on my Instagram page today, or by working with me today.
For anyone who hasn't seen your Instagram page, obviously there's a lot of rope flow on there and other things as well, which we'll get into. But can you explain to those people what rope flow is and the benefits that it can offer people?
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll preface it with the lens of how I understand the body and why the rope is such a perfect way to do it. So throughout most of what we know about the physical body, it was based on dissections that removed something called fascia. And fascia we could think of as like skin underneath our skin that integrates our entire body together, right? So it's like a sleeve of tissue that is integrated in the nervous system. It has so many responsibilities that we don't even fully understand yet, because it's really within like the last 100 years that it's been kind of uncovered and discovered, right? And kind of elaborated on. And so, what we used to understand the spine as with respect to movement, based on that old kind of idea of how the body's organized, is that it's kind of this stable, stationary middleman for the legs to the arms, or from the arms to the legs. It's kind of this passive structure to one degree or another, which through my yoga training and how they perceive the spine, obviously didn't really make sense to me, because it's a totally different idea with the spine in yoga and Hindu philosophy. So when I learned this new idea through understanding fascia on more of a physical side, there's another offshoot of that kind of general idea called spinal engine theory. And spinal engine theory is basically the complete polar dichotomy of how we understand human locomotion based on what is previously thought of, which is legs do everything, spine is the middleman, arms are kind of like the last expression of it. Where spinal engine theory presents this idea that your spine is not just this passive structure, but it's actually the source of all human movement. And if we can wield the movement of our spine, and if we can tension all of the soft tissue that connects to it, which then connects to the rest of the body, we can then move much more efficiently, get out of pain, and we could become far more athletic, because all of these athletic movements that, whether we're from antiquity through dance or hunting or whatever it might have been, things that we just naturally did as humans, right? It all makes sense within this lens of spinal engine theory. And so I bit down on that. And the rope is the perfect way to explain it, and rope flow in particular. So with rope flow, you use a softer, weighted rope, very weighted in comparison to like speed rope. So we're talking about a pound. If you're a muscle bound dude, you're going to need a heavier rope to get that feedback that we're looking for at the spine and at the core, right? Because you're just too
Right.
strong for a 1 pound rope. But for the average person, even for the person who's training and are pretty strong, if you're not like a bodybuilder or a power lifter, a standard rope would do you just fine. And rather than jumping through the rope, which is a type of syncopation where I'm bringing the rope down with my body, but I'm jumping up to avoid it hitting me, right? So it's this
Yep.
kind of like rhythmic, offbeat, disconnected thing that I'm doing with the rope, which, don't get me wrong, jump roping is phenomenal. Nothing bad about jump roping. It's plyometric, it's cardio, it's awesome, gets you light on your feet. But what rope flow teaches you, rather than jumping through the rope in that syncopated manner, it synchronizes your movement by you rotate the rope around your body. So rather than going
Right.
through it, you're now having the rope hit on left and right sides of your body. On the physical side of things, what that starts to teach you is weight shifting, right? Understanding this idea that in locomotion, in throwing, in any athletic endeavor, what we're doing is we're wielding gravity through our body and then transmitting that through space to then perform the task. And all of that requires some form of a weight shift. If I'm going to throw a ball as hard as I can, I have to shift my weight. If I want to throw a punch as hard as I can, I have to shift my weight. If I want to run as fast as I can, I have to shift my weight. And classic conventional training does not account for that, right? So on the physical side of things, you have this low barrier for entry. Grandma could do it, professional athlete could do it, rope. And it teaches the athlete what they already know. And it teaches the grandma how to unleash that dormant athlete for whatever is to her level of capabilities, right? But in
Right.
terms of movement, like you can get an old person walking pain free just by having them understand that you need to rotate when you walk, right? And so, on the physical side of the rope flow practice, every single rep requires rotation. That rotation and the expression of the rope at the hands, ideally over time, gets sensitized to how you're engaging your core, which is then utilizing the spinal engine to manipulate the rope, right?
Mm.
So in the beginning, it's very handy and it's very shouldery, but then people start realizing like, oh, I have all this core musculature that I could manipulate this rope with. And then all of a sudden, man, I kid you not, the stories that people have. I'll share one just briefly. A friend of mine was scheduled for a spinal surgery in May, and it was February of that year. He found the rope 2 months later, canceled his surgery. 4 months later, after that, ran his first marathon.
Wow.
He was about to be on the surgery table. And just because he started learning how to again wield your body weight under the constant force of gravity in an efficient way, that was the thing that was causing the back pain, right? Like if someone
Mm.
walks and they don't have this weight shift, every single step is a rep. And you're accumulating hundreds of thousands, millions of them throughout your life. And if those are off balance, at some point it's going to go to a weak link. That's going to be your hip. It's going to be your knee. It's going to be your ankle. It's going to be your back. It's going to be your shoulder. It's going to be your neck because everything is over your feet, right? And
Mm.
so the physical side alone has helped people get so wildly out of pain
Mm.
that it's like, why wouldn't you do it if you're in pain?
And how would people, would that be, is it a rep based thing? Is it a time based thing? Is it something people should start to ease in easily at the start?
Yeah, so it's called rope flow for a reason. It's based on four primary patterns and then thousands of variations of those patterns. And the way that the patterns work together can be synchronized and sequenced in a way where you can move through every single pattern without ever losing that loop. Because every single one is based on these figure eight patterns with the hands
Right.
generally, but then figure eight patterns with the shoulders, figure eight patterns with the hips. There's overhand variations, there's underhand variations. There's ways that you can position yourself where overhand in that pattern is to your right and underhand is to your left. So you learn how to change directions, you learn how to balance your body. You're getting this beautiful reciprocal movement throughout everything, left and right sides, that without even knowing it, you're balancing your body back from the first rep that you do. So, in
Mm.
terms of like integrating it into your training, if you're brand new to it, you got to give it 7 to 10 minutes to sink into the brain side of things. And you have to just know you're going to suck in the beginning. We all look the same. Like the rope flow community has blossomed to this monstrous community worldwide where it's like it's huge in places like Thailand and the Philippines and all these little pockets of the world where a lot of times they don't have that like bodybuilder ego culture in their physical culture, so
Mm.
it's like easier for them to realize the value in it. um but nonetheless, when it comes to integrating it, like you just have to commit to doing it every day because it's a pattern based tool. And so you have to revisit it. And you'll notice it's like riding a bike where if you do one pattern and you finally kind of get it, you put that thing down, you pick it up the next day, it's like you're 50 times better. And then you're 100 times better. And it just is this exponential growth to what is also an unending level of skill in the practice, and new nuances and variations you could develop over time.
Mm.
So there's no limit to it. You just have to do the bare minimum, which is just spend time with it daily. And then what you'll find, and what most people have found, is that the physical benefits and then again the psychological brain-based benefits are so profound, even if they're subtle in the beginning, that you just find yourself like, I just want to do this thing because it just feels so good. And the next thing you know, it's been an hour and you're like, how did that time just fly by?
Mm.
And it just kind of integrates itself over time if you just commit to just doing it.
Yeah, and I suppose that's the same with everything when you're first starting something. But I think, like you touched on it there, that sort of ego-based sort of a lot of us sort of go to the gym to look a certain way and to look bigger and muscular, and I suppose it's overcoming that in the start of being like, why do I want to stand there with a rope? But understanding the benefits and sort of feeling the benefits as you do more. Um, and something else I want to touch on. So on your feed, obviously there's a lot of rope flow, but there's also a lot of very, very heavy kettlebells. So we were speaking before, and some of the numbers. So for people who haven't seen it, your goblet squatting and sort of one arm switch kettlebell swinging, 92 kilo kettlebells. And it's, most people haven't seen a kettlebell over 30 kilos probably in their own gym. So how a how do kettlebells sort of come into it, and also how can people start to build up to those what seem just unachievable numbers potentially?
Yeah. With the kettlebells in particular, they're hard to understand the concept of, especially coming from the concept of standard training, because it uses momentum, purposefully uses momentum, right? So with this idea of spinal engine, with this tension that you learn how to create with the rope in a very like low intensity setting, right? Because how intense can a 1 pound rope be? Oftentimes the rope is actually a restorative practice where you leave 30 minutes later feeling more energized than you started, right? So kettlebells, in my opinion, I got into them, loosely over the last 5 years, but very intensely over the last year.
Mhm.
Understanding spinal engine, understanding that your body with all of the fascia is designed to move as an integrated single unit that can never actually isolate a particular muscle ever. We can only get close to doing that. You learn how to do just that. You learn how to wield the kettlebell as just something you're holding on to, but utilizing every ounce of your entire body to one degree or another, some more so than others, to make the movement happen, right? So there's a lot of swinging. The snatch is a full body movement. I'm squatting down with momentum and I'm ripping that 106-pound kettlebell over my head and I'm locking it out there. I'm not strict pressing it, which has value. I'm not against the conventional strength stuff, but you can never build movement coordination and solid proprioception in the conventional strength training world. Some guys can do it only because they have it already. But if
Mhm.
someone has not actually understood their body in the sense that it is one piece, and then you put them into isolated bodybuilding splits, all that happens is they become more disintegrated over time. And then the next thing you know, they're running like a robot and their back hurts when they go for a walk, right? And it's sad. Like every man and woman should be able to go for a walk without a problem. That is our number
Yeah.
one function. We don't have to teach our kids how to walk. You just figure it out because it's how we were designed, right? So if you start basing your movements with that idea, kettlebells just become an obvious answer, right? And so I personally only weigh 77, 78 kilos maybe, and I'm wielding in one hand more than my entire body weight with multiple movements that most people can't even keep the grip on to even swing. Like picking
Yeah.
up a 200-pound dumbbell or kettlebell, I should say,
Yeah.
is very different than the momentum and the eccentric and how you have to understand how to funnel all of that force into your body, which for me, at my body weight, at my stature, the only way I can do those things is because I inject the efficiency that I understand internally that the rope taught me and that WEC method in general and all the frameworks and types of the way that they see movement as a whole has actually given me the foundation of. So getting
Mm.
into kettlebells, like in my school community, I have probably 15 or 20 direct kettlebell exercise tutorials. You want to learn it correctly from the start because wielding bells does require a bit of skill, where your setup is going to dramatically impact how a kettlebell feels when you're in a rack, how a kettlebell is on your forearm when you're overhead, right? So there is a bit of a skill component to it. So learning from anyone, from even like the classic kettlebell competition style people where they're doing snatches for an hour, the Russian style, to more of the newer stuff. For me, like I call my kettlebell work like rotational kettlebell training. Because
Hmm.
all of it is again based on that spinal engine theory. So the way I do a kettlebell clean is by no means the standard you'd learn, but the way I've gone about it has taken me to be able to clean my entire body weight with one hand, right? Which that's swinging
Which is,
176
yeah.
pounds from the floor through my legs and bringing it up onto my chest, right? Sloppy because it's my entire body weight, but I could do it, right? And all of
Yeah.
that is really just built on that foundation from the rope, and what it's given me over time, where I've
Yeah.
put it into it. So like, you know, my base framework for someone looking to get into kettlebells is especially like busy parents, dude, or people that are more interested in their work than they are in training, but they know, physical fitness is important to them.
Hmm.
Like get rid of your $60-$70 a month gym membership. Take what you'd be spending at the gym for that year. Go buy 6 or 7 kettlebells. Get one that you can pretty easily but challengingly press overhead. Get one that's hard to press overhead, and then get like 3 or 4 that are heavier than what you could get overhead for two-hand work and for like cleans, right? Because if I can't press the weight, I could probably swing it and get it up onto my shoulder in that rack position. And always have a kettlebell that you can't do something with. Like that's my goal. If I could get that
Nice.
92 kilo bell over my head, I'm probably setting world records at that point, right? But nonetheless, like they're so easy to get into. They're very full body friendly. They're time friendly because it's strength and conditioning with the way you can sequence and complex these movements. And it gives you, at the least, whether you're training it in a classical sense or a biomechanical sense, it's helping you understand that your body is a unit. And it's
Yeah.
teaching you how to move weight and move your body as one whole piece, which,
Yeah.
even if someone is not interested in biomechanics, that is so much more valuable to Joe Schmo than going and getting a physique that looks good but feels like shit when you're trying to do things meaningful, you know?
Yeah, 100%. I agree. And for my time training using kettlebells and training with clients using kettlebells, I think it's such an underused bit of equipment still. And hopefully that will keep changing. And the more you sort of spread your message, that will change. In terms of people who are sort of already training and maybe doing that sort of typical bro split and training just bodybuilding style, what sort of exercises with the kettlebell could they just add in to get some of those benefits from that?
Yeah, I think more of the classic ones are the best ones. So if we think about the basic patterns, right? We could just say push pull hinge squat, right? I don't think we could render it down any more simply than that. If we think about the hinge, the kettlebell is that would be a single arm or a two-hand swing. You're getting your hinge movement, but now it's everything together. It's not just this isolated RDL or isolated deadlift or something like that, right? It's a momentous movement that still trains a hinge pattern very simply, right? And a lot of
Hmm.
people who start swinging heavy kettlebells two hand, like your deadlift's going to go up, your squat's going to go up because now you just got way more access to your hips and your lower body that you just didn't have with that stuff. So it's very complementary. if you don't want to give that stuff up, which is perfectly fine because training is all made up. And it's really just what your goals are and what you enjoy. Like the 80-year-old dude that's still deadlifting into his 80s with no seeming issues, no herniated discs, no blown out back. It's like the dude just deadlifts like at his body weight and it keeps him fit and he likes it. Like that's a smart way to progress the deadlift over your life. But if you start chasing that 1 rep max and stuff, like you're probably going to get hurt, right? So there's nothing wrong with that stuff. But for the average person that trains the way that they do, you probably don't feel the best. Like that's just general, right?
Hmm.
So if we think about a pull movement, that would be our clean, right? A single arm clean, because I have one arm on the bell. I'm getting my hinge input too, but then I'm using my lat and my traps and rhomboids and upper back and rear delts and everything to pull that thing up a little tighter instead of just swinging it out in front of me. And I'm using all of that to bring it in there, and holding it up in the rack position is challenging on its own too, especially you get into heavier weight, right? So multi reps with the cleans, that's your pull movement. Your push movement, I like overhead pressing with kettlebells because of the weight distribution of the bell. It puts you in a much better place if overhead range of motion is not something that is a strong point for you, right? Or if your scaps are all jammed up, maybe winged scaps, whatever it might be, that the way that it rests on the outside of your hand with your hand in through the window, it just is almost always a better option for people for overhead pressing.
Hmm.
Um, Squats, goblet squats are phenomenal. The upper body isometric that's required to keep that bell at your chest while you squat is such a phenomenal core input. Amazing arm because you got to push everything to your midline. Midline tensioning is a massive piece of your structure and how you could manage pressure. So that solves that up top. And then you're cranking reps out down low. Front squats positions for most people are a much safer way to actually squat for a lot of people's spines, right? Like you're managing the load with your upper body. You're not getting nearly as much compressive forces with a bar on your back or even a bar on like your collarbones in a classic front squat. And you can't goblet squat what you can't hold, right? So it's got a built-in safety feature there for anyone who's
Yeah.
like, concerned about it, where it's easy to throw too much weight on a back squat and then get pitted when you're down low. And now you got people trying to save you, or you got to, jerk
Yeah.
yourself forward and pray the bar doesn't slide down your back or take your arm with you or take your hair with you, and then just the classic snatch, because the snatch is an overhead isometric in a lockout position, and it's a full body squat on the way down because of the way the bell has to come closer to you, so it's much less of a hinge. But you're still getting all that pull power, right? Like I had one guy on one of my kettlebell videos like comment like, "Pull start lawnmowers fear this man." And I just started cracking up, because it's just like you're just yanking this thing as hard as you can.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, just those three things alone: single arm and two hand swings, snatches, overhead presses, and cleans. I mean, those five movements alone, you start adding those in as like a warm up to your regular training, you're gonna be moving and feeling way better.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, definitely some really good sort of things to add in there and some like really good insights into the benefits of it all. In terms of yourself, so you've like as we spoke just before, you've recently got a lot more followers and a lot more eyes on. Um, what what is the difference that you're aiming to bring to the fitness industry? Because it's something that gets spoken about a lot, the fitness industry, and whether that's good or bad. But what difference are you trying to bring to it?
Yeah. Um, in me going viral on two particular reels last month, calling out not bodybuilders, as a lot of people in the comments think I'm attacking the individual person, but more so the adaptations of strictly adhering to bodybuilding, which people can't get the difference through their heads with their IQs. But nonetheless, my goal is in my phrase, which is strength of an ox, prowess of a cheetah. Two completely juxtaposed creatures and what they embody as their attributes, and finding the middle ground between them. So my breakdown from that kind of main catchphrase is the ox thick and sturdy, and the
Hmm.
cheetah is fast and purdy, right? So I need to be able to hold my ground. The ox is not a bull. The ox is the harnessed intensity of the bull, to fruitful labor, right? He's the one that plows the fields, that feeds the family, right? And then the cheetah, when that hunt is on, if I got to protect the cub, like you better bet that hunt is on at any point. Cheetahs don't stretch. I don't want to have to stretch if I got to go sprint. I don't got to worry about tearing my hamstring or blowing my low back out just because I got to go run as fast as I can for whatever reason, right? Which is a massive concern for the average bodybuilder. Whether
Mm.
they want to admit the downfalls of their training or not, any guy that I've spoke to with bodybuilding, the last time they sprinted, the last time they played a game of pickup ball with their buddies, they're dealing with the repercussions of that 30-minute input months later sometimes, right? So it's like they want to say nothing's wrong or whatever, like cool, whatever, I don't care. But you talk to them and they actually talk to you and they're like, yeah, man, like my back hurts. I gotta warm my knees up so much that I could barely even get to my squats by the time I even squat on my workout. Right. And so just having that necessary time required to just get to the starting line, I want to eliminate in as many people as I possibly can in the fitness industry. So like blending this idea of maybe unorthodox but somewhat classical styles of strength training, and then all of this new biomechanical fascial spinal engine type stuff, and how can I wield both of those two seemingly completely different things and blend them in a way where I get to be the ox and the cheetah with no issue of merging those two at all at any point. And then
Mm.
like how far can I progress both of those sides of attributes in my own training? And then how could I help other people realize that this is also possible? Because I came from such a beat up background, where it's like after crushing my leg, they were like, yeah, good luck sprinting. Like, good luck. It ain't going to feel good. And now it's
Mm.
like all things considered, you put me on one of those self-propelled sprinting treadmills and you analyze my gait. A, you'd never know I completely destroyed my left leg. And B, it's like, all right, this guy kind of knows what he's actually talking about, even though he might not be the biggest guy or he trains weird stuff. So it's like there's so much with the virality that comes with a bunch of insanity in the comments section, and it shows where a lot of people are at. But I understand it because if I was 19 bodybuilding on steroids and I saw me now, I wouldn't, dude, I'm bigger than you. I don't care. I don't care what you have to say, right? And that's just a personal growth thing. It's where those people are at. And I'm fine with that because I've been there and I could have some grace with them and, not engage in what they're saying about me or what they're saying to me, or, it doesn't
Yeah.
matter to me because it's coming from such a different space that it's not even the people I could even help because they don't care to be helped in that way.
Yeah.
So being polarizing on social media has its benefits because I get to find cool people like yourself or anyone that's interested in my work. And like I just got off a call, I had a bunch of people in there talking with them and doing a presentation. Like all that is so much more meaningful to me than what other people think I'm doing wrong or don't know, or think that just because I could only deadlift this much, they're better than me or whatever. It's just silly. But yeah, really just blending those two things, man. Just the blend.
Yeah, I think it's a great message and I think it's a great goal. And I think, yeah, like you said, there's a lot of that sort of team, like it's your way of training, almost becomes people's personalities. And it's like a personal attack when you say something that may be slightly off what they know. And yeah, it's a weird sort of feature of social media, I suppose.
One more thing on that. In fitness, I personally think that more people who think they're correct is actually better because those people will help the bodybuilders.
Mm.
The people who are great with fat loss, they're going to help the fat people, right? There's
Yeah.
nothing wrong. I was fat. Like it's just where you're at. And so like there's so many reasons to learn from so many different types of people. Like I got a bunch of call out videos on that one reel where they're using, professional athletes doing regular training, and it's like, okay, but they are a professional athlete. Like you're talking about the person now. You're not talking about what they're actually doing here, and you're trying to make this point.
Yeah.
But I can still respect someone who has a different opinion than me because that's how they've served themselves and other people. And so they're going to help more people by calling my video out. I'm going to help more people by calling their videos and ideas out. And it's a win-win for all of us outside of the childish, inability to just disagree with someone and still treat them like a human being, which is
Mm,
hard for some people, especially men with their egos and what they do. And, like I mentioned with the identity, and like you were kind of saying there, the identity that I had was I was a bodybuilder. I was no longer Edward. I was this other thing that Edward does.
yeah.
And, being able to divorce that is just a level of maturity, right? And being able to understand someone else's opinion is another level of maturity that social media brings out the worst in people. Even people I've respected, dude. The comments I've gotten from people that I thought I've looked up to in the past for a bunch of reasons, and then I make a post about about my testosterone experience, and they're on TRT, and then all of a sudden they're a child about it. It's like,
Yeah.
dude, you're like a 40-year-old man who is seen as such a public figure to so many men. And this is how you're treating a kid sharing his story about the reality of the substance. Like who are you, bro? So
Yeah.
it is what it is with that kind of stuff. But personally, I think the more people that think they're right, the better in fitness, because
Mm,
now we get to just niche out our pockets of people and who we can help and who resonates with us and who resonates with them, and we're all ideally at the least just becoming fitter,
yeah.
and healthier.
That's a lovely way to look at it. Lovely. So to bring it in, so something I do at the end of episodes is I ask the guests to leave a question for the listener to take away. So this came from when I used to listen to a lot of podcasts before I started this one. I used to like taking away sort of information from it and have a conversation about it outside of it. So if you could leave a question, they can go and speak to a friend, family, a stranger. What question would you have them ask?
That's a good question. What if?
Nice. Left to be um, taken as whatever you take it as.
Whatever they're going
So
through,
very,
what if?
it's very nice. Ed, thank you so much for coming on today. I really appreciate it. Where can people find you if they want to keep up to date with what you're doing, find out a bit more about rope flow and the things you've spoken about?
Yeah, so Instagram is my primary social media platform. I will be getting on YouTube this year. I do have a YouTube channel with some rope flow videos, just like montages up there from years ago.
Hmm.
But ET Strength is my brand. So if you look up ET Strength on YouTube, I should pop up. My Instagram handle, you could read my name down here. I believe that would be on the recording. So Edward.Troise
Hmm.
is my Instagram handle. My website is ET Strength, and I have my Rope Flow Foundations course, which is well over 100 videos and 10 plus hours of content. It's designed as a step by step program. In there, I get into all of the concepts required to understand the practice, which we didn't get into the brain side of things and proprioceptive side of things, but a ton of information in there about how the brain perceives the body and why the rope works the way that it does, along
Yeah.
with so many videos of actually in-depth demonstration and instruction to execute the movements. It's been trusted by some of the biggest rope flow names in the little niche that we have. It's been around for almost 4 years now. I've helped hundreds of people across the world learn, and then now even go on to be better than me and teach my rope or teach rope flow to their people. Not my course in
Awesome.
particular, but their own experience of it. So I think that's a pretty good pat on the back for myself to produce students better than myself over the years. And then I also have my school community, which was a little bit of an experiment for last year, but that's where people can follow my daily workouts. I got a massive exercise library in there. And Q1 of this year, I'll be launching a bunch of different programs. So, like kettlebell only workouts, where it's like, hey, you only got 20 minutes, you're a busy parent, you're a busy dad, whatever, and you only got a couple pieces of equipment, boom. I'll be releasing a correctives and mobility course. I have a rotational strength foundations course that I'm working on, which is like all the spinal engine stuff that I've done over the last 5 years, which is basically going to be like if you signed up with me for 3 months, like step by step. This is everything we'd be doing to like
Yeah.
build that foundation if someone's totally new to it. I'll be launching like my lifestyle foundations, which, you know, over the last 15 years since that first run, I've gone down just about every rabbit hole you could go down with supplementation and nutrition and water and the environment and biohacks and all these other things. So really just giving people like the meat and potatoes of what I've found to like legitimately work for anyone that I have helped and for myself as well. So
Yeah.
that's where I'm going to be putting a lot of my focus this year in terms of creating value for people. And yeah,
Awesome.
hopefully just reaching more people on the craziness that is Instagram and getting some more evergreen long form content on YouTube, which is definitely a little more of a strong suit for me than all the in one ear out the other kind of
Yeah.
little dopamine bump that is Instagram Reels. But
Yeah, I look forward to seeing where it goes this year, and I'll put a link to all the stuff that you mentioned there down below as well. So anyone listening who's enjoyed the episode and know someone who might find some value from it, please do share the episode with a friend. If you haven't already, then do follow and rate the show as well where you're listening. That helps us reach new people. And you can also follow my Instagram, which is at Lonely Chapter Podcast. And lastly from me, thank you for listening.